Good everything. Hi everyone.
Hey, you get everything. Get
Yeah,
everything.
yes, we are here, episode 205.
205.
I called an audible on the title. I don't know if it makes any sense, but I just playing with when the lie becomes the truth. I was just thinking
Be
about.
careful what you do. Michael Joseph Jackson, now owned by Sony. Yes, be careful what you do when the lie becomes the truth. Did they just seal that deal, right?
You know what's so? Good morning, everybody.
Oh, by the way, we didn't plan this, so y'all thought we coordinated this. We didn't.
No, as a matter of fact, I came down to set everything up, and my camera wouldn't come on, my mic wouldn't come on. I had to shut my computer down, so I apologize for the tardiness. But I was like, "Oh, you don't want me to talk today?
uh,
Okay, all right, no problem, no problem. We gonna figure this out. We're just gonna be a little late, and we're gonna get it. We're gonna get it. But yeah, I went last night. I saw that Sony, that Michael Jackson did never wanted them to own. Went out, got the Beatles catalog, gave Little Richard back his catalog. He understood the.
yeah, keep going. Keep going. Yes.
And now they like,
What they
okay.
got to do is wait for you to die because it's not like that stuff's for the race, right? I mean,
Let me say this. Let me say this. And yes, we are live. We are LIVE live
yes,
to quote Clay K. His family, and this is why I preach so hard on my radio show about not just financial independence, but freedom, because
yes.
you know that wasn't that man's wishes to ever be owned, because he in death he is owned now by Sony. It's so, and Michael Joseph Jackson was a complicated figure, but his allegiance to the Nation of Islam, him and Jermaine, told me everything I needed to know about where his heart lied, and he told some truths. He told some very harsh truths. I'm not sure that's not why he's not here anymore. But that said, I was so angry on his behalf because his family couldn't hold on to it because they never somehow got off the teat. How you sell? Anyway, I'm gonna say less. God bless.
No. You should say more. I mean, what are we talking about here? I mean, they bought Springsteen, they bought Dylan. Uh, who else? Who else? Not Journey, Genesis, I suppose. They're just buying them up, and of course, they are doing it with the backing of never use your own money. So they've got their investment capital, and they're going to make a ton of money. The reason I looked up as you were talking, I'm looking over in this corner, John Johnson's memoir. He writes about how. Oh wait, was it in John Johnson's memoir or was it in? It's one of the books about Michael Jackson, actually, where John Johnson is quoted. Actually, had sent me back to the memoir. I think it is in his memoir about how
Love it.
he asked him. Yeah, he asked. Michael Jackson asked John Johnson to come with him to the meeting with Sony. And so Johnson was like, I know Michael Jackson, obviously covered him, since they were children, blah, blah, been on the cover of Ebony, blah, blah. He said, that was the day I understood that John, in some ways, Michael Jackson's a better businessman than me. And I'm telling y'all, do not, he said, as they were talking, I'm listening. And so he writes on a napkin or something, slides the note over to John Johnson. What do you think about this offer? John Johnson writes back, I don't think you should take it. John Johnson's too much money. Remember, Michael Jackson takes the offer. He said, Michael, he made the purchase rather. And then John Johnson, in retrospect, that was the move. He said, that's when I understood Michael Jackson's a better businessman than I am. That's when he bought the Beatles. It's like, you got to understand, this guy sees something I didn't see. And I'm the guy who y'all all look at as the man when it comes to this kind of thing. That's the day I understood who Michael Jackson was. And I want y'all to know who that guy is. And so for this to have happened, individuals don't beat institutions. They just wait. Because their agenda never changes.
Right. I mean, we're sitting here speaking in English, as you always say. And when the first time you said that, it was so profound to me because I don't know another language. And I also got angry in that moment because I don't know another language. And it's not that I can't learn another language, but that I know my ancestors had languages, maybe 4 or 5 of them that I don't know, that may not even be able to be spoken, as many of the indigenous people have lost their languages because of a plan that was made in a room with people who decided to divvy up a continent and then whole worlds and set forth. And this is what strategic planning looks like on the evil side. So are we going to get busy planning on the good side? Are we going to get planning on the good side for the next 1,000 years, the way they plan for the 1,000 years? Do we have the capacity?
Well, that's two different questions. Of course, we have the capacity. We're still here. Our planning seems to have been better the closer we were to the lash. But the farther we get from the lash, the more we seem to confuse these systems with something that we should participate in as if they somehow lead to human liberation, when in fact all of the evidence is to the contrary. But I mean, you give out a few gramophones, little miniature gramophones, and seem to have forgotten that the RCA logo is a gramophone, but also a little dog listening, and underneath it the title, His Master's Voice. They always seem to forget that. So you get the little gramophone and you think, yeah, now are you the dog? Because there's two pieces in that logo. There's the gramophone and there's the animal listening to his master's voice. Seems to me, Jay-Z, Killer Mike, seems to me, everybody getting them little statues and then walking out in handcuffs a little later. It seems to me that, you're listening to your master's voice. And it's one thing to say that your wife should get album of the year. Seem to have confused the governance and social structure. It's quite another thing to protest it from the stage and to say that you boycotted the Grammys because DMX didn't get nominated, and then you watch from the hotel because Yassa Boss and my master's voice, and then shouting out, of course, Will Smith and Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince for boycotting, but then they watched from the hotel because you're listening to your master's voice. So as you hold that little gramophone, brother, understand that you're the dog in that picture, and underneath it says His Master's Voice. So I guess some people.
I'm going to say this. Yes, you're right.
Or not. I could be dead.
No. You are absolutely right. And at the same time, I feel like so many of us, some people are going to be upset about that or bristle against it because they see themselves in Jay-Z. And I'm saying, see yourself in no one. See yourself. And for that statement, it means that as you learn, as you grow, you should evolve, right? So I'm watching. I feel like that speech was part of an evolution in Jay-Z from we don't need to kneel anymore to this statue doesn't matter. I'm gonna drink out of it, and I'm gonna bring, I'm gonna trash y'all on from the stage. They're baby steps. Some of us get to different places at different times, and I was thinking about this morning in terms of this word truth. As we've watched Cat Williams and now Monique and people taking sides, because it's not a versus, it's about you. Like, what do you take from these moments, and do you honor and love the truth, or are you more into hero worship? Do you worship your master? And your master can be a celebrity, your master can be RCA, your master can be Sony, or do you value the body and life force that you've been given to make it better? Like, I feel like that's the battle that we're in right now. Too many people have abdicated their own sense of self and freedom because they want to be on a side or on a team or be part of something greater than themselves. But you got to be great yourself to be something greater. I don't know, Dr. Carr, but I was thinking about this morning in terms of this truth thing and people, oh, don't talk, you're just bitter or you're angry or whatever. And it's like, if it's truth, then shouldn't we all celebrate the truth? Shouldn't we celebrate the truth, or at least try to find the truth? And I know truth shows up in different ways, but I was thinking about this very deeply this morning. Like, have we been indoctrinated into lies and hypocrisy from the very beginning, from Noah and, his naked drunkenness, sleeping with his daughters, but somehow Ham is wrong for mocking that?
Well, I mean, metaphorically, I mean, again, Theophilo Benga always reminds us, at least the way he frames it, he says, you have knowledge, you have what you know, but he always described it in terms of three distinct categories, and sometimes they overlap. You have knowledge by faith, and that's what we're talking about anytime we're talking about a holy book, and the idea that God talks to you through a book, and if you don't have this book, God's not talking to you. That's a faith thing. I mean, so you're talking about allegory, metaphor, and you can't argue with people's faith. So, and then he says there's knowledge by opinion. Opinion is everybody has an opinion, and the only way you reach some sense of being able to talk across opinions is you have to come up with some consensus on definitions and what you mean. Kobe Bryant gets an 18-foot statue outside the Staples Center, and he say, is he the greatest Laker? Is Kareem the greatest Laker? Is George Mikan the greatest Laker? Is Shaq the greatest? Is Wilt Chamberlain? These are matters of opinion. Well, can we agree on the common points of reference? Okay, we're going to use points and rebounds, minutes played. Are we going to use number of cumulative points played? I mean, championships. But without any common frames of reference, it's all opinion. Then Obenga says the third of the three categories is knowledge by reason. where you have agreed and you understand, and now whatever you apply this analysis to, we will all come up with at least a common point of reference, and we can debate and discuss, but that's knowledge by reason. We live in a world where those three things have been obscured. I mean, so if we have a standard, then certainly Sean Carter, we would have to talk about in our African States category in terms of ways of knowing and cultural meaning making and movement and memory. What is the standard by which we say we have some cultural conversation? Are we talking about right and wrong? Oh, no, now we got to talk about opinion. Why? Because when a man raps, I seen her face when she busted in. I said, shit, it's a draft. Shut the door, B, and come on in. Nigga, what? You go, who? You can never stand on a stage and represent me, sir. There's nothing H to the Izzo V. You know, I mean, you know, Prada blouse, Gucci bra, Fillmore jeans. Take that off. Give it to me. Give me that stuff. You can never represent me, sir. But that's me. That's my opinion. And I value that everyone has different opinions. But if we're talking about a we that moves forward as a community, you're drinking out of something that underscores by the fact you're drinking out of it that you worship it, sir. Because the true thing would be not to show up. You can keep that. I'm going to drink out the bottle, and it's going to be my brand grown on my farm with my sourcers, my supply chain, and we're going to sit back and laugh. We don't even watch your show, but the fact that you're drinking out of it signifies how much you value it, sir. And Jay-Z is playing us, standing on the stage, talking about watching it from the hotel. The whole time, he's almost like the Henry Louis Gates of hip hop. Henry Louis Gates doesn't do anything but signify. He wrote a whole book on the signifying monkey. His whole life is a signification. His whole public intellectual work is a signification. I've seen him. He stood at Howard University's graduation and told a darky joke from the stage, and these Negroes laughed. And I'm saying, did he just tell a darky joke? The only person who I saw in the faculty who caught it was Eleanor Traylor. Dr. Traylor, and shout out to Dr. Traylor and sympathy for her and the passing of her friend and one time office mate with Toni Morrison. Of course, I'm talking about the great Clyde Taylor. They all worked together. Dr. Traylor, who just passed her 90th birthday. I see, did he just tell a darky joke? By the way, the darky joke was he was talking about when he got accepted and would say he was going to Harvard. His people back in West Virginia thought he said. No, he was talking. They said, why don't you go to Howard? And they kept conflating Howard and Harvard, which was the joke. But that ain't really the joke. He said he made the phone call home from Calhoun Hall. And he called home at Yale. He's calling from Calhoun Hall. And I said, what? John C. Calhoun once said in the 19th century, before the end of the Civil War, of course, he's the intellectual architect of the Confederacy and the filibuster in the United States Senate in South Carolina, first state to secede from the Union. John C. Calhoun once said, showing a Negro how to do high order mathematics is not a barometer of the intelligence of the Negro. I can teach a monkey to do math. So when Henry Gates tells a story that he's calling from John C. Calhoun Hall on the campus of Yale to make his people proud about Harvard, and they keep saying, Howard? Howard? Like, oh yeah, Howard, we know Howard. Harvard? Oh, no. Did you just imply that the darkies here can be taught to do anything to ape their masters? But you, of course, work with our master. Whether he did or didn't, I'm just saying, I've seen Gates tell variations of darky jokes in many different places with a little slight smile on his face. Apparently, he's got a new series out on gospel music. And then, you know how old folks used to say, I ain't seen you in so long, you might burst into flame if you come in this church. But at any rate, leave that aside. I thought to myself, well, Jay-Z's pulling a Henry Louis Gates. You clowning everybody from the stage. He does it in the subtext, kind of like we do. I
don't think we do it in the subtext.
No, you do. I mean,
I think it's right between the eyes.
All right.
Which leads me to this, because again, watching how people react to certain things, certain truths. There will be some that say you're just hating. There'll be some that why do we have to do that? And I'm always landing on, don't we want to tell the truth? And I was just thinking about, again, from Noah to David, the most loved from God, who sent a woman's husband out to the battlefield because he wanted her on the front lines so that he could die and be killed. And I think about Abraham, the father of both Judaism and Islam, allegedly, right? I guess that's in the Bible. who didn't believe God and then had a baby with somebody and then sent that baby away. I just, and we're supposed to just like, and these are heroes, right? And then at the same time, we're taught right and wrong and due north and, truth and, these commandments that we're supposed to hold to. And then there's contradiction after contradiction. So it makes it difficult, unless you land on a sense of morality and character that you establish, and that there's no equivocation or bending of that. And that's a hard thing to do, Dr. Carr, to sit in that, because as soon as the wind blows this way and everyone's agreed that this person is famous or this person is our person, the wind goes that way, and then we jump on board. And I've watched it happen so many times, and I'm like, but didn't we just know that this? Well, how we over here? And I just sit there, I was like, oh my goodness. But I feel like we're in a time now where all of that gets examined, and it should, right? I think we should start to examine what we stand for. And this is that moment, and the lie has become the truth.
If we understand that, if we are building a we, if the we we're talking about is beyond who we are to other people, again, coming back to that African states framework, is if phenotype is the lowest common denominator for talking about Black people, then phenotype isn't enough.
No,
if the we are talking about, and again, go ahead.
No. And it's not phenotype, and there is a we. So I'm gonna answer that question. We are building a we. I'm determined. All right, that's on my to-do list, right? We are building a we. We are a we. We're gonna awaken the we. I had a young lady on my show this week, Olivia A. Cole. She's a YA author. She identifies as white, but she said, I'm not beholden to whiteness because whiteness is not loyal to anyone. She said whiteness is not loyal. She said them hoes ain't loyal, Dr. Carr.
Well,
it will use you. It will use you. It will take you along while it needs you to get to where it needs to go.
Is she white? Is she white? I'm confused.
She is white. I mean,
so in other words, she doesn't identify as white, but the world identifies her as white. So
right, and so she uses that, and I was like, "Oh, I ain't never heard a white person say these white people ain't loyal. This whiteness ain't." She said whiteness because it's not people, and I think we get caught up in the people and not in the system and not in the institution.
As we talked about 30 years ago, there was a journal out of Boston called Race Trader, and the header was "Treason to Whiteness is Loyalty to Humanity." I'm not sure if she read that or not, but yeah, the question of loyalty. I mean, we talked about John Brown. I mean, John Brown rejected. I mean, in other words, and this is Du Bois. So okay, so very good. So y'all were talking about that. So she says she rejects it.
Yeah, she also uses it. Because
which one?
Because she's raising a Black child. So it is in her,
What?
Yeah, she's a mother of a Black. She has a baby that's Black. That's gonna be Black phenotypically, right? She's a white lady, has a baby. That's a child that is brown.
Oh, biological
child. She gave birth to a child that looks like more like me and you, more like me. You're a little browner, but she's close to Black.
Yeah, Black baby.
She got a Black baby, and she loves her Black baby very much. And she realizes that race is a made-up construct, but this Black baby needs to not just survive, but thrive in the world and never feel less than and never feel. So she's a crusader is the point. Like maybe not like John Brown, because not many people are going to put their entire lives on the line.
No,
maybe closer to a Jane Elliott, maybe, I don't know. In that sense, but not even using that as the jumping off point of her career, because there are people that use being white and being anti-white as a whole industry, because it's a cottage industry. You can make some money, you can go speak at some Black places, and we love to hear white people talk back. But she wasn't coming there to talk about that. She came to talk about her YA book. But I'm going to always bring it up because you know me.
You got to do that.
That's the question. But it is
a statement like that. That's right. Well, she's writing about a Black subject. Is this her latest book?
No. Her latest, it's not even about that. It's about misfit children that that come of age. Like, she's a YA writer. She's just she's just a writer, which is where I want all of us to be. Like it shouldn't be like we're with the Afro pick everywhere. We just are people having an experience, and this system of whiteness is oppressing all of us to the point where people are voting against their interests, their teeth, their health care, their entire lives, the future of this country, the environment, over a system that only a very few people are actually benefiting from on purpose. It is a system that only a very few people are benefiting from, but so many people want it that even people who look like us are caping for it. And and they don't even know it. So I feel like, as we keep talking, perhaps, we're going to, chip away at these hard and fast things that we believe in, and question everything that you think you believe in, because it's all rooted in this thing to make you believe that, so that you could follow the bouncing ball, which is going to be your demise. So,
I mean, again, forms of knowing. Belief is a very powerful way of knowing. Belief is often, however, the place where a project like that goes off the rails, because belief is not based on something that we can establish outside ourselves. You just get a critical mass of people who believe what you believe. Like, there are people who believe that non-white immigrants are destroying the country. They simply do not understand the economics of the United States of America. They don't understand it. And so that's a belief. But I mean, do you think there's a way to, what are the most effective ways to introduce reason, to introduce informed opinion? At one time, it was perhaps trying to at least have a common denominator of shared awareness of news, world events, local events. That seems to be, in fact, there's an article for today's Financial Times, Cory Doctorow, who coined the term last year, E-essification, U-S-H-I, as you know, E-N-N-essification. That's the word that I think Webster's named it, or American Dialect Society made it the word of the year 2023. He wrote, and I'll just put this so you can see. This is today's article. Welcome to the Enshittocene.
Wait, hold on, Dr. Carr. Shit is right in the middle of that.
Yes, no question, because times people are free. You free, you can cuss. Right, that's true. Not to be confused with liberty, right? So, I mean, freedom, as you say, the unrestricted ability, capacity to live your life on your terms, as long as you're not harming anyone else. But then it gets complicated, because we didn't make up race. Race was imposed on us. But as Dr. Du Bois said, in almost every speech he's been given that we've been reading in Nubia, including last week when we finished up the Field and Function of the Negro College, that 1938 speech at Fisk, he says, this was imposed on us, so we are in it. However, because it was imposed on us, it opens up the possibilities if we will use it as a form of resistance. That's why he calls this cultural dimension, to explore what we have as human beings who have been grouped together because of race that is unique in the world, our unique experiences, our unique knowledges and memories. And the deeper we go into that memory, which is almost all before we were racialized, we can use that. We can use race to speak this truth to humanity, and through our race, contribute to what you're talking about. So in other words, the idea that people will say, well, I don't see color, or I don't want to deal with race, or I just want to be myself. That's what I'm working toward. Okay, but how you get there will determine your success. You're not going to get there by becoming a blackface version of whiteness. This is what Du Bois was talking about. You're not going to get there by making a black institution a black version of a white institution, because those white institutions are based on cultural values that have come into existence over centuries, in part by juxtaposing themselves against you. So if you're talking about
how sick is that? Because as you're speaking, that's pretty much all we have.
No, we're here.
Look, you got but you're saying, okay, we have HBCUs named for white people who follow the white rubric of what it means to educate, all the way to the cap and gown at the end.
That's right.
All of the rituals
that
were rooted in our demise. They
right.
repeated it and put a black face and a black name and some nice black tunes and beats on top of it.
That's right. But the people at those institutions, again, this is why we've spent these months reading Du Bois very carefully and patiently. It's interesting that you would say that, because last night, and we'll talk more about this later, I was on Howard's campus for an event that I'll talk about a little bit later, and spent about an hour and a half, myself, Dr. Watkins, Dr. Beatty, with students after the event was over, talking about these things. And I told them, I said, look, I got to get back to my place, because I got work in the morning. And they laughed because they knew exactly what I meant. And I told them, I said, because, often students will find themselves on college campuses, particularly black students at white schools and black ones, but at black campuses, I think it's more amplified because it's more of a critical mass of us having these conversations. How do we use the university to help the community? And last night we were having a variation of that conversation. If you remember, right at the beginning of our journey during COVID, in fact, before he said, let me press record, let's get this going. I stood in the parking lot and the campus had been completely shut down right there at the end of that week. And I said, we're not going to let y'all down. We're going to jailbreak the Black University. And made a little recording and dropped it on Twitter then. And the rest, we just keep moving. So last night, Mari was sitting there and I said, brother, how many students do you have in your metametric class here this year at Howard? He says, I cap it at 40. I said, okay. How many do you have in Nubia on an average basis? He said, oh man, that's thousands over the course. Said, okay. So I looked at him, I looked at the students and I said, nobody's stopping anybody from working in the community. The question you have to ask yourself is, where do you spend your time and why? And what is your purpose? So, when we talk about the HBCUs, it isn't the structure. That's blackface whiteness. Right down, as you say, to the caps and gowns. That is blackface whiteness. Anybody says it doesn't, let's have a conversation. And we can walk through the exams. We can walk through the semesters. We can walk through the grades. We can walk through every element. And you show me where that's different from Oxford or Cambridge or Harvard or you show me. You don't have the courage or the fortitude to make that change because you're master. You won't be able to hear your master's voice. And I understand it because I am in that. I went and got my licenses just like you did. We both college professors. I mean, we know that. However, the difference is the people. The people constantly in tension. And there are a lot of fine academics who write a lot of great books about this kind of thing. Most of them being at white schools. And they talk about busting up the university and the undercommons and all this. It's very brilliant stuff. And I always find it amusing because they tend to be among the more well-subsidized and fellowship and foundation and chair supported ranting against the Ivy League and the Ivy adjacents. And I think it's all quite entertaining. And as I said to the students last night, I said, but there's nobody with a gun saying you can't go be in the community you're talking about. So if y'all excuse me, I need to get back because I'm going to be in the community in the morning, you know what I'm saying? And I will see y'all next week when I come to class because it should be from the center to the periphery. This is the periphery. And that's the mistake we make. And that includes the recording industry and the publishing industry, all of them. That's the periphery. What you're building, Prof, what you have been doing and now have taken a quantum leap toward contributing to this center. That's the work. So yes, there is a we, but that we is very much defined by parameters that we are building as we're building it. The other demographic we is something else. That's the we that capes for people or picks a side in the Super Bowl or who is saying, oh man, Jonathan Majors, why are they after us again? Or somebody saying, I stand with whoever. That's the people who are watching Club Shay Shay and Monique and Cat Williams. Okay, that's the kind of a demographic we. Struggling with a cultural meaning making to try to infuse that demographic with some meaning beyond. And that's a morality play. That's opinion, it's faith, it's all that.
And it's so wild when because I'm never having a conversation about the pop cultural moment. I'm always having a deeper conversation. But it's so weird how many people can't even process that it's still balls and strikes and X's and O's and verses in their mind. They have to come in and comment to take a side. And I'm talking about you.
Yeah.
What it is that your capacity is to digest truth or understand character, or what are you willing to do to hold people to account or hold yourself to account for the things that we say we want to do or the things we say we want and need? That's our responsibility individually and then collectively. And to your point, yes. I am so grateful to be here, which is why I know we exist, because we're here.
We are here.
This wasn't here 5 years ago.
No, it was not.
And before I got on the radio, I just had an idea that this could happen. But my goal was always to duplicate myself and to see what that would look like, because it should look like many different versions of all of us, right? Through other people. That's how we become omniscient and omnipowerful. I'm saying something right now. That's how we become all powerful and omniscient, is through each other.
Through each other.
Because you know things I don't know. So, but together, oh my goodness, what do we know together? Okay, can we get 4 more people to know something? All right. So now we got a group. Now there's 10 of us. Now there's 100. Now there's 1,000 people that know different things.
That's right.
And through all of us, we know now. And through all of us, we have power, because that's also buying power. That's voting power. That's, like, it's not a hard thing. It's numbers and intention and character. That's it.
Numbers, intention, and character. That sounds like a formula. Numbers, intention, and character equals victory. Is that numbers, intention, and character? That's it. Critical mass. That's it. You got to have those numbers. You got to have those numbers. It's it's interesting. In for next week when we do the future of the Negro State University, I think that's in souls, not souls, in the education of Black people. Du Bois gives that talk at Lincoln University of Missouri. And of course, Lincoln was in the news recently because the sister, Dr. Antoinette Candia Bailey. Remember, you talked about that. Probably that's of course the sister who was vice president of student affairs. Took her life in the second week of January, on the 8th of January of this year. A real tragedy just over a month ago. Having been bullied and harassed by the white president of Lincoln University of Missouri, itself being a travesty that he shouldn't have been in a position, regardless of his race or gender, to have had that kind of ability to wield that kind of pressure on a sister. And when you think about that in the context of Black institutions, it is particularly offensive. Now, we know Missouri, of course, being a faithful state in pursuit of white supremacy. Lincoln is under perpetual assault. We know that. The hillbillies, the white horde, the racists in leadership struggling to suppress the voices of human beings in favor of choosing whiteness in treason to humanity, instead of loyalty to humanity by eschewing whiteness, have been in that battle in Missouri for quite some time. We talked about that again, referencing the John Brown conversation, but talking about, we're not talking about Duluth, we ain't talking about St. Louis, of course. We talked about, of course, what Walter Johnson in his book, The Broken Heart of America, calls the broken heart of America. St. Louis, that gateway to white supremacy as it spreads west. Gerald Horne, of course, from St. Louis, has written about this, particularly in he and his sister's biography of their mother, Mother Witt, which we talked about as well. Like a Horne, exalting motherhood while honoring a great mother. Around the same time as we talked about Alice Wyndham, of course, the brilliant, beautiful sister, world traveler, historian, social worker in St. Louis. We're not just talking about places in St. Louis, Kansas City, in Missouri, but Missouri is a problem and has been a problem. So, thinking about the sister, Dr. Antoinette Candia Bailey, who took her life last month, a real tragedy. And people frame that in terms of the pressures on Black women in the academy, and those are very real. I choose to frame it, my opinion again, I'm not making a cold, hard battle of statistics, in the realm of opinion, as an assault on Black life. And sometimes that assault centers gender, sometimes it centers class, region, place of origin, but Blackness is the common denominator. That is the we. And it became all the more problematic, all the more tragic in some ways, because Lincoln University was founded by Black soldiers. Lincoln University of Missouri, down about the 62nd and the 65th Regiment of the United States Colored Troops, the infantry. They founded that school July 4th, 1871. It was interesting because, again, this week in Nubia on Monday night, 8:00 Eastern time, we'll be reading and discussing, we will have read and we'll be discussing the future of the Negro State University, Dr. Du Bois, who is talking about what happens when education, in terms of institutions, moves from institutions that people create, what might be called private institutions, entities that are generated outside of the government, outside of the state, places like Knarrative and Nubia, that are governed outside of state responsibility. Social media platforms, Enshittocene notwithstanding, and he does a whole evisceration of Facebook. He talks about Facebook, Apple, and Google, and how this, what he calls Enshittocene, lowest common denominator kind of thing, ends up creating a society where that stuff bleeds over. And in fact, what is Doctoral here? He says, last January, Cory Doctorow coined Enshittocene to describe the slow decay of online platforms such as Facebook and Twitter. But what if we've in fact entered an age in which the degradation is spreading from the web to the real world, to our jobs, privacy, politics, and beyond? Well, all of that coming out again of private spheres. In fact, one of the solutions, he says, is you got to have regulation. You have competition in capitalism. He says, I'm not caping for capitalism here, but, and I don't believe that the free market solves everything, but you've got to have competition in order to give people choices. And he says, you got to have regulation. Companies that fear a regulator will find them more, F-I-N-E, find them more than they expect to make from cheating. They'll cheat less. These two forces affect all industries, but then he talks about self-help and the people being these other forces that can push back against this Enshittocene. But I raise it in the context of Du Bois and what we're talking about this morning. Be careful what you do when the lie becomes the truth, because what Du Bois is dealing with as he stands before the graduates of Lincoln University in Missouri in 1941, he is saying that you're at a moment when the state, the government, is pushing past private institutions to provide education. Now, of course, they've been doing that for quite some time, but he's at a moment when you're seeing this happen in real time. And then he's asking, what is the capacity of the state? The states of the United States of America, the federal government, the states in any instance, the state in terms of any country's infrastructure. What is the capacity of the state to truly educate the people who live in that place? And Du Bois tells them at the beginning, he says, it is significant that the institution whose 75th anniversary we are celebrating today arose out of this chain of circumstances. It was among the Black soldiers of Missouri, fighting the last battle of the West, which spelled the final crippling of the Confederacy, that the idea arose of systematic education of their fellows in their home state. Nor was there anything unusual or merely local in this thought and movement. The public school system of the whole South is the gift of Black folk. Coming out of Reconstruction, of course, I'll stop there. We talk about being careful what we do when the lie becomes the truth. What happens when the lie becomes the truth? The lie is, in this country, that all people were created equal. The lie is that this was the perfectible aspiration of the enslavers who wrote that document, the Declaration of Independence, the document, the Federal Constitution. They never intended on us in this conversation, having this conversation, regardless of your quote unquote racial background. They never intended on this. They never intended on the son of a 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 son, the son of a daughter 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 of a continental African, to be destroying them in terms of their ideology, their cultural pretensions, their hierarchy, to their face, with the words that were stuffed into his ancestors' mouth being used as ammunition. Oh, they never intended that. So the lie is that this system's perfectibility was foreseen by these funky degenerates, what Alton Maddox called fleeing felons, that they should be worshipped beyond stacking the green paper that carries many of their faces for transactions. The worship isn't of the face on the money. The worship is of the money. First you get the money, then you get the power, then you get the respect. At least that's what little Kim and the Locks used to say, right? But the point is this. What Du Bois is saying there, and we're going to talk about this on Tuesday. On Monday night. I'm just kind of using it in the context of asking what happens when the lie becomes the truth. Du Bois reminds the students at Lincoln that it was that 62nd and 65th Regiment of the United States Colored Troops coming out of the Civil War who raised over $6,000 in 1871 dollars, beginning in 1866. Actually, they raised that money by the end of the war to found what they call the Lincoln Institute. Du Bois talks about that. And if you look at the work of Lorenzo Johnson Green, one of Carter G. Woodson's boys, as we are still here in Black History Month, who writes about that history of blacks in Missouri. If you read H.B. Foster, H.B. as in boy, Foster, you can find him online. The History of Lincoln University, formerly Lincoln Institute. He talks about the fact that these black soldiers found themselves in a civil war. And of course, white people did not want black people fighting in the Civil War. Lincoln didn't want it. Nobody wanted it. This is a white man's war. But when it was clear that they couldn't win the war without us and that we were going to fight for our liberation, whether we had on Union blue or not, because another lie has been somehow the lie of Black American patriotism. Give it a rest. As Du Bois told those college students in 1938 at Fisk. You know what a patriot is? A patriot is one who gives her or his fidelity to their fellow person, not a funky piece of cloth. So give patriotism a rest. Another lie. Be careful what you do when the lie becomes the truth. Be careful what you do. Billie Jean is not my love. Again, maybe Sony is, because I've listened now. My estate has to my master's voice. And now they own even the words that say, be careful what you do when the lie becomes the truth. So Du Bois reminds these students at Lincoln that these soldiers raised this money, but they went into a conflict where soldiers in the military, the Union military, were expected to learn how to read and write. So what did these black soldiers do? What does H.B. Foster and Lorenzo Johnson Green and the great historians of blacks in Missouri, these African people, what did they do? By the end of the war, that 62nd Colored Infantry had one of the highest rates of literacy in the Army. According to Foster's records, out of 431 men in that regiment, in that infantry, 99 of them could read or write. 337 could spell multiple syllable words and were learning to read better. And fewer than 10 hadn't yet mastered the alphabet. But you know what those brothers did? They said, the war is over. So now you don't expect us to read and write. But guess what? We're not stopping going to school. They raised $6,000 before the end of the war. One brother gave $100 a year out of his annual salary. His annual salary was $162. That's how you raise $6,000 among brothers who came off of plantations. You understand? $100 out of $162 of my annual salary goes to the Lincoln Institute, now called Lincoln University, where a black woman takes her life because some white president is bullying her in this day and age. Be careful what you do when the lie becomes the truth. It's very important to understand that when we start talking about building institutions, individuals don't beat institutions. So what is the future of us reminding ourselves to do this work and reminding ourselves what a we can be? It's very important to understand that, you know, educational institutions have to come from us, and that the state does afford us the resources that we pump into the state must afford us the capacity to enhance those institutions. So this isn't an either or conversation. Du Bois in 1941 reminding them that this is now a public institution, that other private institutions like the white Methodists who met in Missouri to start a school and said they want to create a school called the Central University. I think they were in St. Louis for the meeting. And some of these white soldiers who had been with the black ones was like, well, you know, these brothers have raised all this money, and some of the white soldiers have contributed over almost $2,000. The white soldiers contributed to this. Why don't you all join forces and you can create this Central University? And these good white church people was like, oh, hell no. Niggas be going there? Nigga, what? Nigga, who? Anyway, it's Master's voice. So they rejected that. You know, the N-word is only good for giving out little statues for people who scream at every other bar. And so, but not for going to school with us. The response being, well, if you make this great central university the Lincoln University, it will not bar anyone by race. Well, that's no solution at all. That means we got to go to school with them and they got to go to school with us? Oh, hell no. But because individuals don't beat institutions, I guarantee you that the vast majority of people who are in school right now at Lincoln University, where they continue to mourn Dr. Kandia Bailey, wouldn't be able to tell you the history that we're talking about right now, because even the institutions where we go to school, public or private among HBCUs, don't do a good job of letting the young people know who choose those schools what is the history. Beyond a couple of great graduates and maybe, you know, some fly little stories, they don't really talk about the institutional history, how Alabama A&M came into existence, or Alabama State, how Black people bought property and pawned their farm animals and took the money and then put it together and purchased the place that became the school, or how Morehouse was started in prayer meetings in Savannah, Georgia, how Spelman was born in a church basement. I mean, you know, you talk about this Black self-determination. It does not begin with a critical mass. It doesn't begin with numbers, but there is intentionality and character, as Professor Hunter, as you told us, and that intentionality and character eventually loop back into the numbers, and you build that we slowly. You build the kernel. You build the kernel. Now, when you have control of the state apparatus, well, you can engage in your criminal behavior. You can engage in your criminal behavior, and engaging in that criminal behavior often takes the lie that you're doing it for everybody. Shout out to the pufferfish, now having tucked his tiny tail between his pasty legs and slunk back to the swamps of Florida, Andrew DeSantis. The puffer, dying to die another day, not living to fight another day. Nikki will be back in South Carolina on Kiowa Island soon enough. But right now, we want to talk about the puffer lying to the people of Florida through his teeth that he wants to improve higher education and K-12 education. That is a lie. And so when, you know, he installed his board and the board installed their chosen lackeys to run the new College of Florida. It's a very interesting long form article in the New York Times last week on the athletes who have been recruited to the new College of Florida, baseball players and others, students just looking to continue their athletic careers or get a degree while not going into deep debt because they're getting scholarships because they're athletes. Those students, many of them are not ideologues. They're not white nationalists and white supremacists. They are not. They're there to get an education. And when they get on campus, they realize that they have been brought in part to break up this very ultra liberal kind of freedom of pursuing whatever course of study you want to pursue in your way you want to pursue it, very ultra liberal kind of environment. Some of these athletes really enjoy that kind of environment. And they didn't realize until they got there that they are pawns in a larger war. And of course, we know the well-accomplished educational theorist and leader, Christopher Rufo, when the lie becomes the truth. Careful what you do when the lie becomes true. Of course, that's not true. But, you know, it's hard charging in this war to use public dollars to transform the educational institutions in Florida into white supremacist bastions with your tax dollars at work. A lot of colleagues and friends down there in Florida. My man Dave Canton, who for some time had been the chair of African American Studies at the University of Florida, realizing in Gainesville they're under assault. Gwendolyn Zahara Simmons on that faculty for a number of years, stalwart Pan-Africanist, member of SNCC, brilliant sister on that faculty. Seeing how this assault is taking place. But of course, where are we pushing back? We're fighting them in the public halls. There's a sister whose name escapes me right now in the Florida legislature, always fighting. That sister is always on the front lines, but she's not alone. It's a local level, elected officials pushing back, but the private institutions also pushing back and being very effective. Our brother Frank Madison Reed III, and the network of African Methodist Episcopal churches in Florida He and his wife, of course, being stationed down there right now. That's part of their district, along with the Caribbean, some parts of the Caribbean, the Bahamas, and other places. They are pushing to teach the history we need and the culture we need out of the churches. And they're not alone, not just the AME church, the Baptist church, the small churches, large churches, pushing together. Well, Du Bois would recognize that. He would, in fact, we go back a couple of speeches when Du Bois is giving a talk where he says, the church has to be at the center of this work. The family, the church, the institutions, the communities we control. The universities, yes, but we'll get there. They're on the outer periphery. We control these institutions. So you see that tug of war going on in Florida. Puffer is using our tax dollars to push white supremacy. We're pushing back, but we're not waiting. We are not waiting on that as the only end game. We can do several things at once, and we must always tend to the we that is institution building. Very important. So in thinking about that this week, we ask ourselves, how do we push back? Will we allow ourselves to be pounded into submission? And a great deal of that, and thank you for calling the audible prop, because it's a brilliantly posed assertion to ask ourselves what happens when the lie becomes the truth. Well, that means that we can move in all fervor, in all best intent, in all perpetual desire to advance a thing that is, in the words of our old teacher, Theophilo Benga, exactly wrong. You are exactly wrong. I used to love how Benga would do that. We'd be doing meta-lectures, somebody would come up and make a point of grammar that was incorrect, and Benga looked down over his glasses. He wouldn't even get the eraser. He would use his hand to erase the blackboard. By the end of the class, his hand was like, he had white gloves on. That is exactly wrong. So, but you can believe something that is exactly wrong. Faith can give you that cocksure confidence in a thing that is exactly wrong, because it's faith. It's faith. This week, we saw a man who will go down as one of the great mass murderers of the 21st century, Benjamin Netanyahu, direct his military to draw up plans to invade Rafah. An invasion of a southern city in Gaza of over 1.4 million, probably more. Many of the people living in the Gaza Strip have been driven south by the murderous machine of the Israeli Defense Forces as they engage in wanton slaughter, now surging up close to 30,000 people that have been documented, and 3 times that wounded that we know of. The final tally will probably never be known. All in a stated war against Hamas. Be careful what you do when the lie becomes the truth, because most of the people who have been slaughtered were not members of Hamas by anybody's assertion. And now you've told these people to move south, and you move to the city of called Rafah, which is on the border with Egypt. The president of Egypt being Al-Sisi saying, look, we have closed this border. We've taken in refugees from a lot of places, Sudan, Syria, different places over the years, but we're not taking refugees from Palestine. Now you can debate whether they should or shouldn't, but the whole point is you think you're going to run them all out of there and take that territory. No, we haven't had a peace treaty with you since the 1970s. It caused Anwar Sadat to be assassinated. And the people who assassinated him, identifying with the Muslim Brotherhood, one of the offshoots of that Muslim Brotherhood is Hamas. So we got our own internal problems we trying to grapple with, and that's not taking sides, because Sisi is a complicated figure and a lot of that ain't good. But understand that the billions that the Egyptian government gets from the U.S. government, your tax dollars at work, are given to them because they have a peace treaty with Israel and can be counted on in that region not to jump on Israel, except Sisi is saying, you got to stop this. And Bibi is saying, I have a solution, perhaps even a final solution to the question of Palestine. Perhaps I can exterminate all the brutes. But it's being driven in the state of Israel by a faith argument for some of these people And by these people, I mean the citizens of Israel who are given their full rights, which would mean not the Palestinians who were born and raised in Israel. They don't have full rights. That would be called apartheid. And if you want to have a source on that, why don't you go get James Earl Carter, Jimmy Carter, who wrote a book called Peace, Not Apartheid, and was eviscerated for it. And that would be the same Jimmy Carter who was there for the Camp David Accords, who kind of brokered it. Like or dislike them, understand this is the world that we live in, and there's a faith dimension of that. Some of these Israeli settlers who have moved into northern Gaza and tried to occupy the places where people have been exterminated or driven from their homes with the idea that God told us to be here. Anytime anyone tells you God told them to do something, you need to then listen very carefully to what comes out of their mouth next. Because they are not being driven by reason or opinion, they're being driven by faith. Whether they add reason or opinion later, faith is a different category. The substance, as y'all learn in Sunday school, of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And so there is a faith dimension in what's going on in Israel, but don't confuse that with the real politic of why these billions are being spent over there by these governments in Europe and the United States. Don't confuse that with the real issues involved. Don't confuse that, in other words, with reason, whether it be oil and natural gas, water, or supply chain routes through the Red Sea. These are the factual reasons, but they are often obscured into the categories of faith and opinion when we start talking about everything from Semite and anti-Semite to Arab and Jew to ancient hatreds. See, be careful what you do when the lie becomes the truth. And that has everything to do with being able to sit quietly, read, think, understand, then communicate with each other to build a we that will not be distracted in this Enshittocene world that we live in, with its mind-numbing spectacles. As Doctor was writing here, with everybody got a platform. Well, because everybody got a platform, you can't rely on any of the platforms without doing so little homework, right? It's very interesting. It's one of the longest articles I've read in Financial Times. In fact, this morning, he says here that you have to, he says, the cynics among you might be skeptical that this will make a difference, trying to beat back against this Enshittocene, right? He says, after all, isn't Enshittocene the same as capitalism? Dr. Rowe says, well, no. I'm not going to cape for capitalism, he writes. I'm hardly a true believer in markets as the most efficient allocators of resources and arbiters of policy, but the capitalism of 20 years ago made space for a wild and woolly internet, a space where people with disfavored views could find each other, offer mutual aid, and organize. The capitalism of today has produced a global digital ghost mall filled with bot shit, crap gadgets from companies with consonant-heavy brand names, and cryptocurrency scams. The internet isn't more important than climate emergency, gender justice, racial justice, genocide, or inequality, but the internet is the terrain we'll fight those fights on. We're on the internet right now, aren't we? He finally says, without a free, fair, and open internet, the fight is lost before it is joined. Algorithms, being keen, again, talking about that book we were talking about last week. The idea that we can be driven to fatal distraction. So this brazen flouting of truth, Netanyahu, and the mass murders taking place now in Gaza and West Bank. The White Nationalist Party of the United States of America. Oh, wait a minute, somebody in the chat. I just saw this, forever enlightened. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is engaging in his justified genocide and with the aid and consent of U.S. President Genocide Joe Biden. Again, this is where we have to have this conversation. We saw Joe Biden hurriedly rushing to the microphone on Thursday night because the greatest example of affirmative action in the federal government in a generation, that would be the current Attorney General of the United States, Merrick Garland, a man who by any objective account does not seem to have earned the type of promotions he has gotten, who seems to, his best claim to fame seems to have been that Barack Obama, who in another heroic failure of courage, which seems to be consistent with what his public policy making had been during his time as president, tried to nominate him for the Supreme Court of the United States, thinking that if he just had a very milquetoast nominee, somehow Mitch McConnell, a wholly owned subsidiary of white nationalism at this point, a feckless ghoul who seems to have to reboot periodically just to be able to carry out his continued assault on the idea of our common humanity, would somehow allow Merrick Garland or anyone else, this nigga, what? Nigga who? Tried to pick to be on the Supreme Court, to get on the court. Wasn't going to happen. And because he couldn't get on the Supreme Court, Joe Biden comes along when he wins an election and says, well, we'll give you a consolation prize, the Attorney General of the United States. And Merrick Garland, this great affirmative action appointee, says, well, thanks. I'm going to turn over a special prosecutor, a guy that Donald Trump put in, Robert Hur. So what'd you expect, Joe? Of course, the guy is going to leak the report and go out here and make some reckless ass statements about the fact that you couldn't remember the date your son died, and it pissed you off because how in the hell, how dare you, as you said on Thursday night, bring that up? My son passed. You think I don't know when my son passed? Or so, of course he was going to do that. You shouldn't be mad at him. You should go get the man you appointed as Attorney General. That's why you're in this mess. But to call him Genocide Joe, it's a cute nickname. It's an accurate nickname, even as Tony Blinken has racked up frequent flyer miles, keep going back there trying to tell Netanyahu to stop, and Netanyahu looking at you like, hey, you knew who I was. When that nigga, what? Nigga, who? When Barack Obama tried to muscle me, I just got on a plane and came to the United States of America and spoke before a joint session of Congress. Since, I have that capacity, and I think is the American Israel Political Action Committee registered in the United States of America as agent of a foreign power? I'm not sure. I don't think it is. Maybe it is. Somebody could look that up in the chat, either the YouTube chat or the Nubia chat. But you seem to mistake me, Netanyahu, to Blinken and Biden, for somebody you control, when it's fact the other way around. In terms of what you have as an interest in this region, what we serve in terms of your foreign policy interests. We're not talking now about opinion or faith, even though opinion and faith get us to this point, because the white evangelical Christians who have a deep record of anti-Semitism are very much supporters of Israel, because they believe, article of faith, that in order for their interpretation of biblical prophecy to take place, Israel must be supported. So we do know that, of course, domestically, that is a very important, faith plays a very important role. But in terms of reason, in terms of fact, in terms of what is actually going on, real politic in that region, we know that the United States is not going to back away from Israel unless it's forced to. And that force would have to come not only from the whole damn world, except a few places in Europe, which is where it's coming from now, increasingly, but also domestically from the people in the United States, where it is also coming from domestically. So to call him Genocide Joe is not an incorrect labeling in terms of his capacity, but of course, Genocide Barack, Genocide Ronald, Genocide Jimmy, Genocide George, those titles would also apply. Maybe a little less for Genocide Jimmy, but let's be very clear. U.S. foreign policy on Israel has been fairly consistent. Not without nuance, but fairly consistent. I say all that to say this. Be careful what you do when the lie becomes the truth. The lie, for example, that somehow some insurgent third-party campaign are not participating in electoral politics at the presidential election in 2024 is somehow going to make conditions better for Black people. Let's have the debate. Let's have the discussion, but let it be an informed one, because if we are indeed trying to combine some form of integrity, some form of character, with creating critical mass to engage in collective work that will create a better society, then we need to do a little bit better than take uninformed opinion and faith and take it into the voting booth, or take it at home and not in the voting booth, because I can guarantee you right now, Donald John Trump get back in as president of the United States, particularly with all that money his son-in-law has in the region invested in property, apartments and buildings. You know, what is it, the Abraham Accords that they were running during the Trump administration? Go check how much money Kushner has been able to pump into that region in terms of signing contracts with his little venture capital enterprise, started after they finished stealing from the Oval Office. Be careful what you do when the lie becomes the truth. At the end of the day, the killing of people, what did Du Bois say in Credo when he wrote when he was in his 20s? He said, I believe that war is murder. I believe that war is murder. It is murder. And murder, mass murder, is taking place right now. Not studio murder. Right? Not studio. Right? Not Sean Carter saying, nigga shot 2 shots at me, I shot 4 back. No, sir. Have another drink out of your master's voice. But real murder is taking place. Don't mistake studio beef with mass murder beef. And so, yeah, Genocide Joe for sure. And in 2025, in January, should he not be in jail, you'll have Genocide Don. Except you'll have Genocide Don with also an evisceration of whatever domestic policy you might have thought you were going to claw back. Then you're going to find out. When Trump was in power, we had money. That is uninformed opinion. So, excuse me, I got a cold. You know, I've been COVID testing every day and make sure I can still go to campus and negative. So it's not COVID, but it's a cold, and I'm going to stop talking in a few minutes. But I just wanted to get a few things out this morning, just in terms of how we're thinking about this in the context of lies and truth, and where we are in a moment when there's been an escalation of brazen flouting of single-minded, one-track assaults on our common humanity, and it's global. You know, the Pakistan elections don't seem to have been settled quite yet. El Salvador just had its elections. South Africa is getting ready to tee up. Cyril Ramaphosa is out there condemning Israel as well in terms of foreign policy, but he got a lot of problems at home. You know, the poor are suffering. So now Ramaphosa is promising, the president of South Africa, to do better by the poor. You've been promising that now for 30 years, bro. People now think it's a lie because their lives have not changed. And so there's a lot of stuff going on in the world. Here in the United States, we saw this week, the United States Supreme Court, Donald Trump's lawyers arguing that Section 3 of the 14th Amendment doesn't apply to him. And whereas before, I just assumed it would be 8-1, Ketanji Brown Jackson being the holdout, that they were going to really try to make some appeal to Sotomayor, to Kagan, and to Jackson to make it unanimous to keep Trump on the ballot and make this a political issue. It looks like it might be that happens. Maybe Sotomayor will be the holdout. But listening to the oral arguments this week in the Supreme Court's hearing of Donald Trump's challenge to being stricken from the ballot in Colorado, which really doesn't matter because the ballot's already been printed. He's already on the ballot. Colorado could choose not to count the votes cast for him, but it looks like increasingly the Supreme Court of the United States is going to rule, maybe even unanimously, we'll see, that he should remain on the ballot. But what was interesting, his lawyer argued that the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment doesn't apply to Trump because Donald Trump is not an officer of the United States in the plain language of Section 3. Brown Jackson seemed to almost buy that, which is odd to me because the guy is the president of the United States, not an officer of the United States. Again, this is up to judicial interpretation. It's not in the plain language. And Brown Jackson is real good about going into the legislative record. So, you know, it's very interesting. But what caught a lot of our ears listening to those oral arguments and then people talking about it afterward, because, you know, it's very interesting to have people, anytime people talk about arguments before the Supreme Court and the interpretation of statutes of the Constitution. It was interesting because the argument was that Trump wasn't an officer of the United States before, wasn't a congressman, wasn't a senator, anything like that. That he's an ex-president, he's not in office. well, Kagan, Sotomayor, and others, they're like, well, you saying then that this rule in terms of U.S. history only applies to one person, Donald Trump. Well, kind of, yeah. That's an absurd ass argument. In other words, the founding fathers, who y'all love so much, who I would like to think that I would have been trying to kill or poison, like the thousands of others on the plantations, run by George Washington and James Madison and Thomas Jefferson, James Monroe, and anyway, that they anticipated Donald Trump. I mean, it's just, you should have heard something. But the other thing that struck at everybody was the first question that was asked from the bench in the oral arguments last week was by a man who, if there were rules, shouldn't have been nowhere near the court that day, because his wife is a whole ass insurrectionist and proud, says it with her chest. That would be, of course, Clarence Thomas, whose wife Jenny was texting the chief of staff of the White House like, stop the count, stop the steal. I got busters coming here. We getting ready to turn up. And her husband, Yassa, listening to his master's voice, sitting there and asked the first question from the bench, sticking a middle finger up to the entire U.S. bar, the entire notion of jurisprudence and ethics, and just letting you know that we getting ready to mash the gas on this project. The brazen flouting happened this week. And so it's very important to understand something as I kind of wind to a close today. Last night, again, while I was out late, and here's what I talk about the program last night we were in. This being February, it's Negro history, everything, all the time. And the students at Howard University and the Department of Afro-American Studies, our students, the Kwame Ture Society, which was founded in the year 2000. I was the first advisor, I'm proud to say, the Kwame Ture Society, the founding advisor for them. They have invited a series of speakers this month. Last week, our dear friend and brother Akinyelu Umoja from Georgia State came up, gave a brilliant talk. Next week, Abdullah Kalimat will be in town. Black Love Day, the 14th of February. So y'all around Howard's campus, might want to check that out. And this week, it was our old teacher, Malefi Keti Asante. It's very interesting. And it was really a full circle moment for me, for Dr. Watkins, Alethea Watkins, Dr. Mario Beatty, because we were trained at the Temple program at the time that we went. There was only one place in the world where you could get a PhD in African American studies, and that was Temple. Again, understanding the lie that you have to go to a university to study. We know that's a lie. That is one of the most edifying, inspirational, instructive, directive dimensions of Nubia and Knarrative, our platform, is that our conversations are driven by our commitment. They are driven, and that critical mass that has formed and is continuing to swell, that is continuing to grow, that critical mass that is continuing to grow, that we that is being formed out of intentionality, and that ethic, that commitment is being driven by a desire to make a better world. It's not the only place, not even by far, but it is being driven with an intentionality that says that we are bringing all the other places that we are aware of into conversation with each other. And that is how we build a we, even beyond the smaller we's we have, the clusters. This was Du Bois's hope every time he stood on a Black college campus, having worked at one for decades, having given talk after talk after talk after talk, and being in conversation. This was his dream. A dream that remained unrealized. And as we jailbreak and have jailbroken the Black university, putting it on the periphery of work, making it important, but not the center, understanding that center has to be driven by people for whom licensure, for whom hierarchy and status are not their first intentional desire. But building community is an intentional desire. It's very important to understand it. So last night, we had to be there because this is Malefi Asante. And as I said in introducing him last night, we have come full circle. This was a historical moment last night at Howard for several reasons. As some of you all know, when I was in my second year of law school, actually the first year of law school, the summer of 1988, I had come back to Nashville from Columbus, Ohio come see my mom and them, cut some grass, sit at the house. I stopped by Al-Kabalan Books. Baba Yusuf recently became an ancestor, and bought a couple of books. How Capitalism Underdeveloped Black America, The Great Manning Marable, and Afrocentricity, Theory of Social Change by Malefi Asante. As I joked last night in introducing him, I said, this is one of the reasons I'm poor. I didn't practice law. I was going to do civil rights anyway, so I wasn't going to make no money, which is, wasn't my intention, for the people. But reading Asante's book in tandem with How Capitalism Underdeveloped Black America, and then a little bit later, Jacob Carruthers' book, Essays in Ancient Egyptian Studies, and I was off to the races. The idea was, I'm going to be a college professor. I'm going to teach in high school, college. I'm going to be in learning environments with people, because we need more people to help people find their intelligent voice by applying that to serious study. And so that really altered my life. And, I went back, finished the law degree, myself and Dr. Watkins, Legally Watkins, and then we got our master's degrees in African studies right there at Ohio State University. I'll never forget us sitting with Manning Marable to have a conversation about that. He was at the time chair of that department at Ohio State. And Asante's work, what he says, simple idea that African people must be at the center of thinking about not only African life, but our humanity, what is called Afrocentricity, which now everybody uses that word, but let's be very clear, the 1980s, at the onset of what became the Black Studies War. It's a great article by my man Greg Thomas in the Village Voice in 1995 called The Black Studies War, Multiculturalism versus Afrocentricity. It's very interesting. Village Voice did a few interesting articles on Black studies. Bakari Katwana, my man Bakari Katwana, wrote something. But Greg Thomas's article was very interesting because he talks about Henry Gates. Henry Gates, who is now, talk about Skip Gates, not important. We've had that conversation before. You look in the archive, but it's very interesting. If you go into the Village Voice archives now, if somebody finds that article, I have a hard copy of it somewhere in storage, but if you find the article in the Village Voice archives, which are searchable online, somebody drop it in the link, because I can't seem to find it anywhere. It's like I can see Bakari stuff, I can see other pieces, but what I can't see is the Black Studies War, multiculturalism versus Afrocentricity, because Harvard didn't have a PhD program until the late 90s. The second one came into existence was University of Massachusetts Amherst. My man John Bracey, now an ancestor as well. Ernie Allen, Esther Terry, and so many others. Catherine Adams, Kathy Adams from Philly, got a master's at Temple in the program with us. Our classmate then went to UMass and got her PhD. Knows that program well. But now everybody got one. And the idea is that all of those departments are doing what we would call Black studies. Be careful what you do when the lie becomes the truth. Because at the center of Black studies, at the center of what Malefi Asante and Winston Van Horn, as he told the young people last night, who really kind of challenged him to take this to another level, at the center of Black studies is what they would call Africology, is the idea of the study of African people on our terms. Afrocentric, African-centered study of African people, not just of African people, but as African people of everything in the world to contribute out to the world. This is what Du Bois would call broad sympathy. This would be then not the exclusion of any other groups of human people, but human beings, but saying that out of Africana, we will study the world and contribute to the world, recovering memory that has been short-circuited in some ways as the attempt was to pound us into submission, the mind-numbing effects, the brazen flouting of white supremacy. Well, the Recovery Act, that's why we chose Temple, and Temple chose us, because it was the only place in the world to get a PhD. Hundreds of people applied every year. Just knew we weren't going to get in that first year, but somehow we did. Had to delay going to Philly. because we just figured we'll be rejected. We'll know what to do the next time, apply next year with a stronger application. We got in the first time. Now, what the hell? Oh my God. Can we delay? Yeah. Spend another year reading. And so, we return full circle because, it's some interesting times. Yeah, any of y'all have ever been to graduate school in particular, you can get in all kind of knockdown, drag out fights in graduate programs. And I'm certainly one of those fighters. I'm going to fight. I'll fight everybody if need to be. And sometimes those fights aren't as informed as they should be. Sometimes it's just righteous indignation. I'm going to fight and not back up. Something Dr. Sante said last night to the young people in particular who asked him about this question of fighting within universities. He said, sometimes you got to pick your battles. You got to decide. And I love the way he phrased this, Prof, and everyone. Sante said, what black ideas are you willing to die for? You ask yourself that. All out of them fights that you think you want to get in, they disappear. It's very interesting listening to Monique talking to Shannon Sharp. I mean, really talking to us, using Shannon Sharp as a prop. I mean, watching her and Cat Williams basically clown and lift up Shannon Sharp at the same time. It's like, I mean, it's just, I'm sure Shannon Sharp's a really nice guy, but I'm looking like, man, these cats just basically anyway, especially Cat Williams. But watching her is interesting because, how young people say no lies detected. There's probably nuance in many of the things that she shared in that conversation and has shared over the years. But one thing is consistent as a metronome when it comes to Monique, the actress, the performer, the celebrity, is that there is this declaration that right is right, wrong is wrong, and the truth got to be told. Well, what is the truth, said Pontius Pilate, and would not stay for an answer. That old line from Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. Some of y'all recognize that from Frank Capra's movie with Jimmy Stewart playing Mr. Smith, the uncorruptible congressman who's running up against the machine. Ain't too many of them around today. But like some of the members of the squad, like Monique and Cat Williams, the idea that I'm going to tell it and y'all going to have to deal with it becomes compelling theater for those people who want to have a champion of right and wrong, but might not want to do the work of joining the we that if we did that collectively wouldn't make moments like that spectacle or necessary. And they come with a cost. They come with a burden. And so I remember in the 90s, those Black Studies wars. I went to school in the middle of the Black Studies war, and we chose the side of Black people, Afrocentricity in particular. And we paid a price for that. But even within that program, there were arguments and conflicts. I had open arguments and conflicts with Molefi Asante. And so last night was a very important moment coming full circle because he is an elder. He is my elder. And as I told the students, if it weren't for him, we wouldn't be here. There are 5 PhDs in African American Studies at Temple, at Howard University that came out of the Temple program. The 3 of us that studied when Asante was there, we took our degrees with Theophilo Benga as our major advisor. He would not have been at Temple if it's not Asante hadn't gotten him. And 2 others who were our students, Josh Myers, Amy Yeboah, who we trained. Josh at Howard sent him to Temple, and Amy, who came out of Philadelphia Freedom Schools, was in grad school at Temple in sociology, switched over to African American Studies, and under the leadership of the department at that time, the great Nathaniel Norman Jr., who can't spell the word retire for all of his brilliance, is down in Morehouse, directing the Writing Center now, Pop is, who made sure she got out. So no Temple, no us, and no Molefi. No Temple as it comes to African American Studies as that program was developed. Again, one of the people who was there, including his wife, Carr Asante, was on his committee, was of course Daniel Omatosho Black. That's where I met Black, as he knows, as we all know. And I'm saying all that as prelude to, as I wind up with this, Dr. Asante opened his conversation last night. Very gracious conversation. Said some very kind words about me, about Mario, about Valethia, about all of us. And it's important to understand that on the periphery of our fight are these institutions, these universities, and these universities are not at the center of our struggle. They are on the periphery of our struggle, although they play an important role in the periphery of the struggle. The community is at the center of the struggle. It's important to recognize where those places are, where we really do try to provide that space for young people in particular to find their voice, find their capacity to study, find their discipline. Very important to understand that. So it was very kind of him to make some of those remarks. But he went on to say, and he opened with this, he said, the fight that we are in as African people in the contemporary world is a real fight. And the enemies of our common humanity, as I would phrase it, are now, engaged in full spectrum opposition. In fact, Asante called it, Malefi called it a tsunami. He said it's a tsunami. There's a sustained attack on all of our institutions, he said. It is a tsunami. And one of the students asked him at the end, how do we fight back? This was a continental African, a brother from the continent of Africa, who was asking about spiritual traditions in Africa. And Dr. Sante mentioned the work of Toyin Falola, his friend Toyin Falola, who has written recently about the fundamentalist movements in Africa, the evangelical movements. The white Jesus is exploding again all over the continent in places like Ghana, pasted up on the walls and paintings and the evangelicals. Black churches in Zimbabwe led by white pastors. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. What? Who? Anyway, the point that Asante made in responding to the question of how do we push back, he said, I almost hate to say this, but it would take, in terms of indigenous spiritual traditions of African people, it would take a fundamentalist indigenous revolution. In other words, people who said we're going to practice indigenous spiritual traditions in Africa, and we're not only unashamed, we're going to push them to the exclusion of the rest. I almost sound like John Henry Clark, which has its own ironies, because when we came to Temple, we had already been apprenticed in that community-based education. Jacob Carruthers and Marimba Ani and John Henry Clark and Yosef Ben Yakinen, and you name it. Kwaku Larry Crow and Ife Carruthers and all the people at the Kemetic Institute. And so we didn't come to Temple without having the community at the center of our enterprise. Mashariki Jawanza, Kamal Jawanza, all them people we was bringing with us. So even the licensure was a means to an end. And I'm saying all that to say that when Asante said it might take a fundamentalist indigenous movement and a fundamentalist indigenous revolution, what he was saying is, to fight back now, the we that congeals is going to have to basically distinguish between us and them. That's a painful distinction sometimes to make, because it puts you in a position where if you don't have a strong us or strong we, when the people come for you, because they're going to come, these people who are fighting against us, you won't have a place to go. And you might have to sing for your supper or beg to your master. You would think if you were a billionaire, you would have to drink out of your master's voice instrument to prove that you ain't scared of your master. But maybe the money isn't the barometer. Isn't that right, Reverend Wright? Reverend Wright had an independent institution, Trinity. He say what he want. Y'all came for him, but guess what? He still stands. So maybe the money isn't what creates an independent institution, although it is extremely helpful in helping us to facilitate the institutions we do create, and we do need resources. Maybe the money becomes the chain. You understand? As Sean Carter once rapped, I used to rap like common sense. This shit, and I got some money, got paid, and I ain't rap like common sense. No, now you drink champagne out of Grammys. Where's the dog? Oh, you the dog. Watch out, dog. Give it to me. But the point is that we have to now think, what happens when the lie becomes the truth? We have to now reestablish the truth. So they talked about that last night too. It's a fundamentalist fight to reestablish the truth. And when you're doing it, finally, student asked him, well, how do we do that? What's the best we can do? He said something I remember John Henry Clark used to always say. Dr. Clark would say, do your best work. Mom Norman, Pop Norman's wife, Rosemarie Norman, Dr. Nick Norman's wife, will always say, just do your work, do your best work. And last night, Malefi Kete Asante, answering this young person, said, do your work well, with boldness and courage. Communicate with people. That's the best you can do. So, Prof, I'm grateful to be here, be a member of this community. We do our work with boldness and courage.
Yes.
Communicate with each other.
Yes, thank you for all of that. Yesterday, another brother from Temple, Sam Reynolds.
Sam Reynolds, another student. That's right, my brother. Yes.
we were in Nubia, you know, because every month now we're examining the stars, the zodiac through leaders, right? So he
Lord.
chose Toni Morrison and Angela Davis, which was an
Yes,
interesting conversation. But he was talking about being a student in Toni Morrison's class. She was
yes,
Aquarius, and he, you know, I read her books and I looked at it as a like a pentateuch, you know, that you know, the first 5 works were part of a biblical thing, and he was so proud to, you know, tell her about her own work, and she listened and she said, "No."
wait. This was Miss Morrison. I saw you saying
Toni Morrison in a class, you know,
that
and
sound like Sanchez too. But anyway, because I know he took her
yeah,
too.
but you know, there's something to be said because he said, you know, in my hubris, you know, I read all the books. I was gonna tell her, you know, what she was thinking, you know, and the arrogance of that. And she didn't argue with me. She didn't tell me why I was wrong. She didn't take it. She just said no,
No,
and then went on. And I thought about the say less of that, you know, as we go back and forth this election season, or even try to cajole people into, you know, seeing and reading and all, you know, the very simplicity of no, you know,
no.
just saying less and allowing somebody to grow into which he understands now. He was like, that was so stupid, you know. But you know, when you get young people, which you were in community with last night, you
Yes.
know, the folly of youth is that you think you know everything and you know absolutely nothing, but then you want to tell everybody that you know things that you absolutely don't know. And then some people never grow up and they are that in their 40s and 50s and 60s, and it is just, you know, and as an educator, one of the most powerful things is silence, and the other most powerful thing is asking questions, which is what, you know, I think we should question ourselves, question everything, question other people so that we can gain knowledge. I said, so you didn't think to ask her what she was trying to accomplish with those first? He said, no, I didn't. And I thought about how so many of us think we know something and we're willing to, you know, die on that hill
Really down it.
of knowledge. And it's
Yeah.
like, man, there's so much to know. And I'm so grateful that I get to at least, you know, I'm jotting down notes. I got to read these books. I got to
Oh,
read that article now, you know, just so that we can broaden, so that I can be my part of the omniscience. You know, I can do my part to know more so that when we come together, we can know more. But that's got to be the exercise
it's
going
got to
forward.
be exercise. And we don't have time to waste. I mean, I see people in the YouTube chat. I'm just glancing over here as you're talking, thinking, and somebody said, yeah, I'm not compromising my values to vote for Joe Biden. I'm going to vote down ballot. We should have that conversation. We should have that conversation, because the reality is that the House of Representatives in the United States, Senate of the United States, are not going to flip overnight. In fact, we see now this clown out of Maryland, Larry Hogan, has announced he's going to run for Senate. There will be some people fooled by that. There's no such thing as a moderate Republican now. We saw what happened in New Hampshire, which is fool Sununu. Or talking about, I'm moderate, but you're not moderate. You're a white nationalist. You're going to vote for Donald John Trump, and so is your friend Larry Hogan. So I'm saying all that to say that, you know, what we have is a space now where we can have these conversations, not to set somebody aside, not to say, I don't like how you said it. But as you say, Sam, you know, did you think to ask her? Nah. Well, you know what? We should have this conversation, because it is a serious conversation. And it's not a question of opinion. It's not a question of faith. We need to have a question of reason on these things, because our
It's
people
strategy. Like
it's
what's the
strategy,
goal here? Yeah, it
right?
feels good. It feels good. I keep going back to render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. This is not a question of morality or your faith even. This is Caesar.
Right.
You know, and we're in Caesar's, you know, we're in the tax collecting and all, you know, we're in Caesar's house. So what's the strategy here?
What's the
How do we get more, you know, it's like, yeah, we all have our own, you know, due north as it relates to what's right and wrong. But this is not about that. This is politics.
this
In your house, make sure your characters due north. Make sure you're doing everything right. That's the one thing you can control. But if you're
fact.
not applying it to yourself, now we're gonna take it into political scheme, and what you do affects me, because that's the other thing. It's not just about you and your morality. It's like what you do and decide to do and not do affects all of us. And if we all collectively are getting people to not vote or to vote for a third candidate, all of this is going to have a deleterious effect on a lot of us
Absolutely.
who aren't ready for the find out portion of the effing around.
absolutely
Not ready for it.
right. And we understand that in that pool of people who are not ready for it, there are people who are so much in harm's way that whoever the president of the United States is may not affect them. And there are people who are so immune to that the people will not affect them. A lot of my friends who are academics are in that second category, or they revolutionary as hell. And if the white nationalists get in, they're not in as much harm's way as those who are at the other end of the spectrum. It's very important. Now, those 3 Africans from Georgia who lost their lives because of that drone attack, did they join the military because they loved America so much? No. So I suspect they were part of that economic draft that often says, I can get in here and advance my life. And now their families have to bury them. So the question becomes, who's going to send your people in harm's way? Genocide Joe. Yeah, well, Genocide Don's going to do that too. And guess what? He's going to do it with a side dish of no health care. He's going to do it with a side dish of, so if your health care is good, you're a nice college professor or you petty bourgeois member of the family, okay, it's fine. Then, yeah, you can choose to be super progressive. If you are so far down that you don't have any access to benefits, or if you don't have it, then maybe I can understand. But for the vast majority of people, policy matters. If you're not going to expand Medicaid, if you're not going to expand healthcare in the South so that children don't have, as Adam Driver wrote in his book, Brother Driver, who writes for The Atlantic, the cruelty is the point with these people. They're trying to punish you. So if you think somehow that these people are going to be better, I understand your theory, but either you've got gold standard benefits or you are so tuned out and just trying to live from day to day. I get that other end of the spectrum as well. But we need to do better than that. And that's why we're here Saturday after Saturday. And that's why you're on the air 5 days a week, not counting this. And that's why 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, the platform of Knarrative has been established so that we can bring those people together. And by the way, thank y'all for asking. Yes, this is emergent tea. Yes, I'm drinking some yada because that's what she do. So
and the reality is a cold's got to run its course because there's no cure for it. So you just gonna, help your symptoms. But it's just, it's all right. It's all right. And I love the pushback because we should be engaging in conscientious, intelligent, well-informed discourse, not just utterances and rants.
That's right.
And it's okay. We don't all have to agree because that's part of how we grow. It's like, all right, you make a good point, but what about this? And we should be all open to hearing a good point and then being nimble enough to change.
That's it. That's it. I love that phrase though. You might have to make a shirt. We have gotta have that intentionality, gotta have that character. This is the thing. It's not gonna happen accidentally.
No,
it's not gonna happen accidentally.
I love you. Feel better. Feel better. I'm not used to hearing you with your Barry White on, but definitely get some right.
Yes, right. No question.
I will. Thank you, Dr. Zenyatta, for healing us too. Appreciate you. And y'all tune in Nubia tomorrow. I think it's Mental Health Sunday. So we're on mission. We're intentional. I love you.
Love you too. See you.
All right, Dr. Moore. Bye-bye. Okay. Bye, everyone.